This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, with my very special guest for the second hour, Greg Burnham, known to us all as Monk, who has spent most of his career as a motorcycle escort officer, has had a long-time interest in JFK research, actually had the opportunity to view another film of the assassination that was taken in Dealey Plaza, used to serve as a sergeant of arms on Rick Della Rosa's JFKresearch.com website, where, Monk, I think that's the very first place I ever posted on any forum on the internet.
Is that right?
Yeah, and it's such a pleasure to have you here, my friend. You remember those good old days?
I certainly do. Yeah, there was nothing like it. Rich did a great job creating an area where people could share their research and all the new research without the fear of being overly ridiculed by anyone, actually, and it was a very great endeavor.
It was a hospitable environment. I got to say, Monk, I've now spent quite a lot of time on both the Education Forum, which, of course, was founded by John Simkin, and the Deep Politics Forum, which was founded by a group disillusioned with the extent to which ridicule, sarcasm, and attacks took place on the Education Forum. But I've been acutely disappointed to find that some of those same attacks go on the Deep Politics Forum, too, so that I'm in awe of how Rich was able to manage such a wonderful environment for the exchange of research and opinions and argument about JFK.
Yeah, and healthy debate is, as you are well aware, is crucial to truth finding and truth seeking. And so the idea, was never to censor people. The idea was never to prevent argument and even, quite lively discourse. I mean, we had a lot of heated exchanges, heated battles on that forum. But there's a line that gets crossed, as you're quite aware, that can result in the disruption of normal research. The disruption, when I say normal research, I mean productive research. That's a better word, productive research, where it actually gets disrailed or derailed. And sometimes it appears that it's intentional. Sometimes it's just maybe ego-based. It's hard to determine sometimes what the cause could be, but it's irrelevant what the cause is. The point is that kind of rules of engagement. And I'm not talking right now specifically about any other forum. I'm just saying that type of behavior, in so much as it derails legitimate research, is really detrimental to what we're trying to do. So one of the things Rich was able to do was whether it was determined that somebody appeared to be, intentionally causing trouble to disrupt the research, that was going to be disallowed, or whether it was just a personality quirk. It really didn't matter. Disruption was a disruption. And so he ran a real tight ship that way. And at the same time, he had a huge respect for freedom of speech. It was probably his, number one or number two concern with the forum. Probably number one would be the, revelation of good research that leads us closer to the truth. But right behind it would have been, freedom of speech, because as soon as you start disallowing people to voice their opinions and voice what they have to say, then you're really, that's a disservice as well. So balancing those two things was something really interesting to accomplish, and Rich was, God bless him, a great man.
You're absolutely right, and after Rich's death in Shelby, his wife was at a loss as to what to do with the forum and found it too difficult to manage herself. I was instrumental in suggesting to the Deep Politics Forum that they might want to archive Rich's forum, and they've done that, Monk, so I'm really glad that I had a role in preserving the content of that truly magnificent research edifice that he had created over many, many years.
Yeah. I remember the way I got introduced to Rich. I had been in contact with Jack White back in the mid-'90s, probably from around, I'm thinking about 95 or so. And I remember, sending an email to Jack originally and asking to make telephonic contact. And I think that was my opening email. I don't know if I provided my number in the first one, but if I just suggested that we maybe could talk. So he sent an email back. We exchanged a few, eventually exchanged phone numbers, and this was in a relatively short period of time. And I remember when I called him up and we were speaking on the phone, the subject of the Zapruder film came up. And prior to this conversation, I really hadn't spoken to anybody outside of, I'm just going to put it this way, kind of an inner circle of folks that I knew that had viewed another film of the assassination like I had. I hadn't spoken with anybody about it. And so when I brought this up to Jack over the phone, and I understood that he had been doing some work, or else this was the beginning stages of his work on it, the anomalies that were present in the film, that in the extant Zapruder film. When I said to Jack, I said, look, just for information, and I hesitated to say it to him, and the reason is I think that sometimes it's beneficial for someone to reach their own independent conclusions. If a person can prove, whether it's through just impossibilities that you're seeing within the same film, that these two things can't be happening at the same time in the same film. If you can independently establish that, and there's other ways of doing it. Sometimes it's mathematics, sometimes it's distances, whatever it might be. But if you're able to do that, sometimes that has an extremely strong effect on its own merit. And so then you don't necessarily need corroborating things, which it wouldn't hurt if you had them, but you don't necessarily need them. So typically anytime somebody comes out and says, I've seen this or I've witnessed that, etc., sometimes you can draw unwarranted or unwanted attention to yourself, because really it's not about you, it's about the evidence. So that was kind of my hesitation for bringing it up. So when I brought it up to Jack, he was, of course, very interested. And he mentioned to me that an individual named Rich Della Rosa had also seen a film that, according to Jack, matched entirely, as far as Jack could tell anyway, what I had just told Jack that I had seen. And up till here, I didn't even know Rich Della Rosa, never had heard of Rich Della Rosa, and was really quite unaware that this type of research was going on where they were scrutinizing the extant Zapruder film. It was just not something I was aware of. But I personally was aware of another film that I had seen. And when I first saw the extant Zapruder film, sometime obviously after 1975, the Geraldo, Robert Grodin and Geraldo, what was it, America,
Today,
Today Show, or whatever, the first thing that I thought when that odd, I'm going to use the word splice possibly incorrectly here, but for lack of a better word, where all of a sudden the limousine appears, seemingly out of nowhere. One minute there's a Elm Street with a motorcycle cop, and then wham, and then there's the car all of a sudden. That was just a complete disconnect, because the film that I had seen that appeared to be from either the exact or a very similar angle as to the point of view that the so-called Zapruder film is being shot from, there was no, you saw the car actually while it was still on Houston Street before it even began its turn, just as it came into view, and as it made that really extremely wide left turn, and I can't emphasize that enough, an extremely wide left turn. Apparently, it would appear, again, because I visited Dealey Plaza now, I can say that my first impression was accurate, that what appeared at the time to be a near miss of the curb. It's hard to forget that kind of stuff. So not only am I sure that I saw it on Houston and making the turn on to Elm, the detail of the wide turn really was quite pronounced. But the difference just in that one area, I was able to kind of justify temporarily in my head. I was able to kind of write that one off at first and say, well, you know what? Maybe they decided to, just cut to the chase and drop that first part out. And then as the film continued, it got odder and odder. I mean, the first thing is, it's just, the people who criticize, folks who have scrutinized this film, tend to look at some of these things and say, well, you're making something out of nothing. You're going on your gut or you're going on your feeling. Well, I'll tell you what, I've never seen a film that feels like that when you're watching it. This is the most unnatural thing. And it is far removed from the film that I saw, not just in content, but in the continuity of it. I think that's probably the best way. There's like a fake continuity that goes into it. Very, very, very interesting. And my impression was that they were also cutting parts out to make it less brutal. I mean, that's what I thought. I figured that, maybe they did some editing because they were planning on showing this on television more often or on different times of the night or something. I mean, now it's the mid-'70s. It's now becoming evidence. It's not being, secreted someplace or whatever. So maybe in the interest of the viewing audience, since we're not treating it, quote-unquote, as evidence in a courtroom to prove something, they were making a softer, kinder, gentler version of the film for the benefit of the audience's, emotional response to it or whatever. But as time went on, the extant film, as you know, became the holy cow of the photographic evidence. Well, the extant film is certainly not the holy cow of the photographic evidence. And in fact, those people who do, realize without any doubt in their minds that there was a conspiracy to assassinate the 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, in broad daylight, those people who agree with that, but still have a reluctance to really look at the evidence on the Zapruder film alteration side of this. One of their arguments is that the Zapruder film in many ways, has been evidence that's been used to poke a lot of holes in the official story because it apparently shows that there appears to be, anyway, a shot that originated somewhere from the front. And, there's a lot of problems even with that kind of with that kind of reasoning because the same film was also used by the Warren Commission to say that a lone gunman did it from behind. And the House Select Committee on Assassinations had way more evidence and material and eyewitness testimony, et cetera, than the Warren Commissioners supposedly had to begin with. Plus, they had opportunity to view the film over and over and over again. And it was only because, supposedly, of the acoustic evidence that they came out with the weak. And when I say weak, I mean he was the victim of a probable conspiracy. Probably the victim of a conspiracy. So even the House Select Committee on Assassinations, using the so-called, not to borrow David Liston's phrase, but I'll talk about photographic best evidence, supposedly, the Warren Commission concluded what? The Oswald acted alone. And the HSCA didn't even rely on it to come to the conclusion that it was a probable conspiracy. So this so-called, best evidence that I'm going to use the term, I don't like the term conspiracy theorist because I'm not one, and I know that you aren't one. And this is not about theorizing about it. But those folks who have rejected the official government version of this crime and have said, look, there's definitely been more than one person involved in this crime, and there's no question about it. Even those folks that are having trouble with the Zapruder alteration concept have to admit that if the Zapruder film has been so beneficial to truth-seeking, why is it that two main government bodies concluded, based on it alone, that Oswald acted alone? And again, even the HSCA, based on the Zapruder film, did not come to the conclusion that a shot originated in the front. So to me, that's always been kind of a glaring disconnect between the film and the result of how that evidence has been used.
Well, Roy Truly, among others, confirmed exactly what you described about the limo swinging out too widely. He was standing there and took it all in and said how the driver had swung out too widely and nearly hit the concrete abutment there. So he was quite startled. And then, of course, he reported how the driver had pulled back to try to get back more in the center of the road, and then, to his astonishment, had pulled to the left and stopped.
Right, he overcompensated, yeah.
I'd love for you to expand, therefore, on what you saw in the other film you viewed as opposed to the extant film we have now, and what are the most striking features that were different, Monk, when you finally saw the current version?
Let me say a couple quick things. The first is this. Under the circumstances and conditions that I'm not going to go into, that I was viewing this film, and I will also say it wasn't just one single viewing. It was several viewings over several occasions over a number of years. And the part of it that at the time I never realized that the details of this were going to become so important later in terms of comparing to the extant film. So if I could go back, and see it again, it would be very easy to comment on some of these. So some of this, I'm going to tell you, I'll be very honest with you, is going to be impressions, and some is going to be what I'm going to say, I'm going to call fact. In other words, in the sense that this I'm not doubtful about at all.
Yes.
A couple of things here, this is my best recollection, but I'm not as certain of it. So one example of it, my, again, best recollection is that initially, as that car made that wide turn, that there may have been a stop around the corner of Houston and Elm, okay? If this wasn't, quite such an important thing, I would say, yeah, it stopped, okay? My best recollection is that it is, but the truth is, I'm not positive. It may have just really slowed down. I mean, equivalent practically to a rolling stop.
Or a hesitation.
Yeah, real hesitation, okay? But brief, seemed pretty brief.
Yes.
After the completion of that left turn, the limousine began to drift, is the best word I can say, to the left, because in the extant film, it's coming down the center lane. So in California, we name it, lane 1, 2, and 3 from left to right from the driver's point of view. So he began to go into lane number 1, in other words, the far left lane, and didn't take distinct measurements, but he was definitely to the left of center of Elm Street. But distinctly. This wasn't just, a little bit left. No. He was over there to the left. He seemed to be oriented more towards the grass by the time coming out from behind the Stemmen sign. And I'm trying to do one aspect of this at a time, and then I'll go back and run it again.
Yes.
And pay attention to other stuff. So this is just the orientation of the car. After the completed turn, and you know how Elm begins to decline. It's on a downgrade.
Right.
So there's kind of a flatter area up by the corner of Houston and Elm, and you go maybe, I'm not sure what the distance is, 20 feet, 25, 35 feet or so, and it begins to distinctly decline. And I'm going to say about maybe a second or two into that decline, the Queen Mary, the Secret Service follow-up car, which was riding literally, right on the bumper of the president. And I should also add, that's not unusual. The follow-up car should ride right on the bumper, particularly in the circumstances that you see in Dallas. And the reason for that is to give the agents easy access to the client so that they're able to protect him with their own bodies at the first sign of danger. So, and of course, we see no reaction whatsoever, even though everybody reports having heard popping sounds and what could have been gunfire, what could have been firecrackers, what could have been. And it's okay for a civilian, right, a bystander in the parade, to be watching and hearing something and think it might be a motorcycle backfiring or a firecracker. That is okay for them. It is not okay for the protection detail to assume that it's probably nothing.
Yes.
But that's exactly what they did.
They should assume the opposite.
They should assume the opposite. So as that car began to come down that decline, I guess you'd call it, the gap between the Queen Mary and the SS X100 grew by, I'm going to say, at least 2.5 to 3 times the distance that it had been originally. The distance it had been originally, we're talking probably maybe a motorcycle or 2 lengths apart from each other. And it probably grew to 6 to 8 motorcycle lengths, at least, possibly more.
Suggesting that the agents didn't want to be too close to the limousine when it was going to be the target of multiple hits.
That's a possibility. I don't know what any motivation, truthfully could have been. I think there's, but I can't imagine that the motivation is that they figured that from that distance they'd be able to protect him any better. when that gap got sufficient, the other thing too that really bothered me about the extant film is the Stamens freeway sign. What the heck is that thing on there? What is that? It's a piece of duct tape or something. I mean, what the heck is that? That's not what I saw. I mean, on the film that I saw, it looked like a real sign. It looked like a sign sitting there. And it wasn't flat against the perspective of the point of view of the camera. The thing looks practically flat. It was slanted. The right side of that, from the Zapruder position, the right side of that sign is farther away from you than the left side of that sign. And you can tell. In the extant film, it looks like there's a flat thing stuck right there. So in the film that I saw, it was not blocking nearly as much of the view and for nearly as long as in the extant film. It's very brief, in fact, in the film that I saw. As the limousine emerges, there's already distress being shown, and there was what seemed to me to be an odd lack of motion, and I guess actually you can kind of see that in the extant film as well. The JFK is just sitting there, frozen practically is what it appears like. When just before the headshot, the car slowed way down and then came to a complete and full stop. Not a rolling stop, none of that, a complete and full stop. So unlike up at the corner where I said that there was a hesitation and perhaps a complete stop, definitely going extremely slow. I'm not going to go and say I'm sure that it stopped because I'm really not. But farther down, around where the steps are, there was a complete and full stop of the car. And it was in that stop when the kill shots occurred. Then the car sped off. In the film that I saw, I was able to see the Queen Mary at the same time that I was seeing the X-100.
During the time these shots took place while it was stopped?
Yeah, at the time that... And the Queen Mary was still coming up from behind, and apparently had to slam on its brakes, or it would have run into the back of the X-100, because that one was not moving at all, and it was stopped. And I would say the length of time of the stop was about 2 minutes. 2 seconds, approximately, give or take a little bit. But it was distinct. It wasn't, a fifth of a second or a half a second even.
Could have been 3 or 4.
It could have been. It could have been 3 or 4. My best recollection is about 2 seconds, which is enough. Which is, way, way more than enough. Then the X-100 continued off. The agents came out of the back of the Queen Mary. Again, best recollection is 3 to 4 of them with weapons drawn, apparently looking to return fire or to do something. Agents, without going into any detail here, agents are trained, obviously, on the proper use of firearms and are very good at what they do. And they're qualified to hit targets. But they're more qualified at creating situations where they don't have to fire their weapon. And at the point where you have to fire your weapon, you have failed already. And anything happens after that, you really got lucky. So the fact that anybody had to draw their weapons to start with, I guess seems, might account for the reason that they appeared to be so disoriented in the film I saw. Extremely disoriented. Not like this is what they were expecting to be doing. So, when I say that there's in my opinion, some Secret Service complicity in this, I'm certainly not implicating every member of the Secret Service or even the presidential detail that was there that day. I really don't know what happened, but something broke down drastically, and there's a tremendous amount of evidence that at least some of it was not incidental or accidental by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just not willing to throw any individual agents that were there under the bus because I really simply don't know, what happened. But I do know that the car stopped. I do know that that was when the headshot occurred. Then it sped off. Some agents came out of the Queen Mary looking around, weren't out very long, got back in the car, and then it sped off. Afterwards.
This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, continuing my conversation with Greg Burnham of his observations of the other film. And And Monk, of course, you just explained how the limo came to a halt for several seconds, that JFK was hit and killed during that period of time. Then the limo sped off. Meanwhile, the Queen Mary had come to a halt. Agents got out of the car, were looking around, and I gather then, while they were looking around, of course, the presidential limo was long gone, and then they reboarded the Queen Mary and took off themselves.
Yeah, that's correct.
Now, something of special interest, of course, is that a Secret Service agent by the name of Clint Hill on the left running board has reported how he got off of the running board and ran up to the presidential limo, got on the back of the steps, and pushed Jackie down, actually lay over Jack and Jackie in the back seat and peered into this gaping wound in the back of his head, then turned to his colleagues and gave him a thumbs down, and that all this happened before the limo got to the triple underpass. Can you comment on that?
The part of
what Clint Hill's describing. Did you see that in? It's not in the extant film, but I'm interested in what you saw of Clint Hill's actions in the film you've seen before.
For whatever reason, Jim, I do not recall specifically Clint Hill's reactions, and it could be mostly because I was focused on other items. I recall Clint Hill, at the time, of course, I didn't know it was Clint Hill, getting off the running board and running and doing, what we see him doing in the Zapruder film. The problem is that there's a total disconnect for me between what is on the extant film and in the film that I saw. Because there was too big a gap between the two cars. You look at the Nix film and the Zapruder film, and it's that's humanly possible. There's I don't know. That I cannot explain.
Given what you saw in the other film, there's no doubt in your mind, is there, that the Nix has also obviously been added. That's
not what I saw. Put it that way. That's not what I saw. What I saw was something entirely different. Again, some of these details, because I didn't know at the time, kind of what to look for in order to compare. I really don't have an adequate answer for that one, and I don't want to.
Well, no, that's very interesting, Monk, because maybe Clint Hill didn't do all those things. Maybe all he did was get up on the back of the presidential limo. I mean, it's fascinating. Let me read you this, because when I discovered that Rich Della Rosa had actually seen another film, and actually on 3 different occasions, one in 74, one in 76, and once in the 1990s, I asked him to write about it for an appendix for the third of my 3 books on the assassination, the Great Zapruder Film hoax, where I brought together experts on different aspects of the film. And he wrote an appendix, it's Appendix E in the film, where he talks about it. And he says, by the 3rd occasion, I had viewed the extant film many, many times and had it on CD-ROM and had virtually memorized every frame. When I then saw the other film, the differences just seemed to jump out at me. I simultaneously realized that I had seen the other film before and that it was not the Zapruder film, by which he means, of course, what we have today, the extant version. Here is what I remember from viewing the other film. The film shows the limo making the turn onto Elm Street. In other words, there is no gap in the film between the initial motorcycles and the limo. The limo had difficulty making the turn. Greer swung wide and had some difficulty regaining control. As such, the limo was in the curb lane at the top of Elm and gradually moved toward the center as it continued. If you look closely at the extant Z film, you can see evidence of this. Just prior to the headshots, the limo stops. Not slows, but stops. The occupants of the limo are jostled as the car comes to a sudden stop. In my opinion, JFK was hit in the head by a shot from the rear. Bill Greer turns around and looks directly at JFK. Just as he does, the exploding headshot occurs as if on cue, clearly fired from the front, with blood and brain matter splattering to the left rear. Very graphic. Greer then turns back around and the limo lurches forward. The stop lasted maybe 3 or 4 seconds. I believe that Greer stopped the limo in response to a signal being given from someone along the curb. The limo rapidly accelerates as it approaches the underpass. The lead car appears as an obstacle and eventually pulls over, allowing the limo to pass it. I have always believed that the camera angle was similar but not identical to Zapruder's, causing me to conclude that the other film was taken by someone else, perhaps a concealed cameraman using high-quality 16-millimeter equipment. Monk, what thoughts do you have about Rich's sketch of what he saw?
I mean, I again would say at least 95% of that is the same as what I recall.
Yes.
Yeah, it's right on the money. Again, the 3 to 4 second stop.
Yeah.
Definitely, it could have been. Didn't seem that long to me, but whether it's 2 or 4 seconds is irrelevant to this particular, what we're talking about.
Yeah. If Clint Hill had done everything he says he did, however, it's much more likely that it was a longer interval of the stop for him to get off of. Although, once the limo stopped and he's getting off the Queen Mary, to get up to the limo when it's only a few feet shouldn't take very long. But 2 seconds isn't a very long period of time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's also true. It's again, some of these things I don't know that I'm in a position to adequately address it or to adequately judge it. In my opinion, that this is again just one more of almost possibly hundreds of things. Definitely scores of things that the bottom line to all this is that Oswald did not kill JFK alone, and there are so many indications of it in so many different ways. Additionally, the cover-up is also a conspiracy,
That's
and
right.
This is one of the indications of that conspiracy to cover up. So, whether it stops for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, the extant Zapruder film shows no stop at all.
Yes.
And that's definitely evidence of a
yes. And of course, there are good reasons to justice. There are good reasons to doubt whether Oswald was even a shooter, in fact,
right.
Because we have multiple reports from co-workers of his presence down around the lunchroom at 10 at 12, at 12, at 12:15, as late as 12:25.
Yeah, like I said, there are there's just scores of things. One of the things that's very interesting, again, getting back to the Zapruder film, is and again, this isn't, I know what we were specifically going to talk about, but just the blur and non-blur issues in the film. For most people, you look at that and you go, this is kind of common sense. You don't have to be a physicist to get that. I'm an amateur, photographer at best, But even I know when I run a movie camera. There's something sharp in the front and I'm moving the camera, filming something that's moving, the background is blurred if the foreground, if the subject is clear. And if the subject is blurred and the background, you can't have them both clear at the same time. And this seems really elementary.
Unless, of course, the limo is stopped.
Right, if the limo stopped.
So that Roderick Ryan already explained to Noel Twyman when he was preparing the publication of Bloody Treason that there were frames in which both the limo and the background was clear and sharply in focus, and he told to Noel exactly what you're telling me, namely, that could only happen if the limo had come to a stop.
Yeah, it defies, or for whatever reason, you've altered the film in a way that is so fake and so animated. You either didn't know what you were doing, or you weren't that concerned about, attention to those type of details. Perhaps you just, or maybe you just overlooked that, made a mistake. I don't know, but it defies the laws of physics. It can't be both ways. Yeah,
the laws of optics. Yeah, that's exactly right. And of course, John Costello has made this one of the points of his critique. Where have you ever had a chance to view his visual tutorial introduction to Zapruder Film Fakery, which is archived on assassinationscience.com?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And in fact, my wife and I visited with John and his wife in Melbourne this year because I've got some family actually in Australia. My first granddaughter, et cetera, was born over there. And so my wife and I had the opportunity to visit John and his wife in Melbourne this year. And I had already, of course, seen the work on the website as well. But it was kind of good in person to So his setup there at home. And
well, my show yesterday, Monk, by the way, was a rebroadcast of John Costello's interview on Black Op Radio with Leno Sanik.
I thought that was a very good interview as well, yeah.
Yeah, isn't that wonderful? So, I mean, it's just thrilling to have that interview on Friday and then to have Jesse Ventura and you on today, Monday, to talk about this and further follow it up. And then, of course, we got Rich De La Rosa in your description in John's studies of the faking of the film. I mean, there just isn't any doubt about it, is there?
Oh, no, there's no doubt about it. I never really thought that it would have gotten to this point. I saw Jack in Dallas this year when I went out there for the COPA conference, and Julie and I visited with Jack and Sue as well. And Julie asked Jack at one point, she said, when did you first start, researching all this? And he said, well, immediately after it happened, that's when I first had my suspicions and first started looking into it, and of course, increased his work after that point. And Julie said, well, did you ever think, here it is, going on 48 years, actually, if you want to put it in perspective, it's going on 50 years.
That's right.
If you want to look at it, did you think when you were doing this at the beginning how long this would take? Jack said, I thought it would take 5 years, maybe 10 years.
Not 50.
It's been 50 years almost.
Yeah.
And it's amazing.
And how would you account for the fact that it's been so drawn out, Bud?
In my view, and I wrote about this a while back, I don't believe that the perpetrators of the crime, and again, identifying the exact crime, wow, that's an interesting topic all on its own. Because one, we've obviously got a crime of murder. We've also got a crime, I'm going to call it a crime of coup d'etat. Because that's a different issue altogether than a simple, and I'm saying simple not to minimize it, but a simple crime of homicide is one thing. But you've also got a coup d'etat, so you've got a change of government on top of it.
Right.
So it's a completely separate crime. Then you've got obstruction of justice, both before the fact of the crime, which means then what? Well, conspiracy. Then you've got obstruction of justice following the crime, which is, there's no statute of limitation on some of these when they involve conspiracy and when they involve a capital crime like murder. So when you start looking at that, one might be tempted to say, well, they keep covering it up, assuming this is all correct and there was a conspiracy, et cetera. They're all attempting to still cover this up so that they, quote unquote, get away with it. Well, guess what? They got away with it. See, they got away with it. The people that were in charge at the top of this were never worried about getting implicated and going to jail for this. That's the farthest thing from their mind. To me, what the important part was, I think, is if the American people were to come out of their slumber, their very, very deep slumber, there would be possibly a revolution of thinking, a revolution of mind. And that is probably the most dangerous revolution that there is, because it doesn't involve violence. It doesn't involve any of the typical revolutionary type of activities that we've had to, have in the world over the centuries and centuries and eons of years that we've been here. I think we've gotten more sophisticated than that. But the kind of revolution I'm talking about is a revolution in thinking and what you're willing to accept, go along with, support, what you're willing to question. And I think that's probably the main threat. I think that's the main reason to continue the cover-up, because there's really nowhere to go from here. There's no prosecution that's going to take place. It's been 50 years. There's not really a way of getting there from here. But I think that, and I think that's been proven over and over. I mean, even Gerald Ford admitted that he changed the Warren report, right, in order to show that the bullet that entered JFK's back, he raised it up 3 or 4 inches to make it more, quote-unquote, consistent with whatever. I mean, well, where I come from, that's called obstruction of justice, and that is a punishable crime. And here's a guy, unlike Nixon that he pardoned, he didn't even need a pardon to get away with that after confessing it for all intents and purposes on national television. Wow. Yeah. It's an amazing thing. So they're not worried about getting away with it. They've already gotten away with it. It's not that. But it has to do more with preventing human beings from waking up, from getting back into control of their lives and in control of their government. Because this is, after all, a government by and for we the people. And
that's the theory, Mike. That's the theory.
Right. Well, and that's why there are shows and good people, like yourself, doing this to try to keep people awake, to try to wake some of them back up, But I think that people, in my view, that's the main way to defeat this, as James Douglas would call it, this unthinkable or this unspeakable.
Yes.
Is probably the first and foremost way is to be awake yourself, to be paying attention yourself, and that even if you're not able to change it immediately, or even if there's all this resistance, and possibly the media will never change, what they're doing these days. I mean, the media used to not be a profit center. ABC, CBS, NBC used to not be a profit center in the newsroom. Today it's profit centers. They're all profit centers, and so it's difficult to know. What are the important issues according to the media and what aren't? What's serious? What isn't? What's dangerous? What's safe? Who's our enemy? Who's not our enemy? And it's all that nonsense. I think people have to kind of really start to wake up and not accept what they're being told, and at the same time have a heck of a lot of faith. And I'm not talking about that in a religious sense. I mean faith in the human spirit, but not to the point of being blind or complacent, but faith that we'll be okay, that we're going to make it through this stuff as long as we stay awake and we keep talking and try to keep our rights, intact and not lose too much of that. I mean, I used to be a lot more cynical about it. I a number of years back, working on this case. Very frustrating. You talk about it and you listen to people, whether it's the everyday person or very educated people on it, other researchers, and sometimes it can get very, very disheartening to have these conversations. And then I kind of, as you know, I kind of took a step back from it for a number of years and came back to it with kind of a fresh view. And it's like, okay, how about this, Greg? Don't try to change the world, Just change your own mind, change your own thinking, and stay with that, Always be open, to new stuff, to modify it and whatever, but keep a hold of myself, and that kind of helps to ground me, and maybe something that I can say can maybe help other people. Well,
and you're making such a valuable contribution by describing your experience of viewing this other film, which you saw on several occasions, and I think that's extremely valuable, just reflecting on 2 points in relation to our conversation thus far. One is, it strikes me what an excellent witness you are as a motorcycle escort patrolman, that you would have an astute sense of the relative positions of vehicles in relation to a roadway, distances between cars, and all that sort of thing. I think you're really, truly an expert witness in that regard, Muck, and I think, therefore, your contributions here in describing this are all the more valuable for that reason.
Well, thanks, Jim. It's kind of an interesting thing. Before you called and we went on the air, I was kind of daydreaming, and I was having a sandwich and daydreaming at the same time. And something that kind of went across my mind. There's a lot of parents out there that are probably, listeners to your show. And I can't imagine any parent looking at their child at the first sign of danger, not shielding that child with their own body. I can't imagine it. Or how about a spouse, Yeah. I mean, for instance, Jackie Kennedy, in one sense, was attempting to shield her husband.
Yes.
And but how about Nellie Connolly? It pulls him all the way down, right? That's not even her own child, just somebody that you respect, care about, or love. And you're not even being tasked with this because to do anything less. See, this is something that you love, but being tasked with it because it is the difference between a democracy and a dictatorship, a democracy and a totalitarian regime. Whether or not you can see this totalitarian regime taking over or not, that's irrelevant.
Now, Monk, you mentioned Jackie. Did you recall in the other film you saw seeing Jackie crawl out the back of the trunk to go after a chunk of Jack's skull and brains?
No. What I recalled, my best... It's okay, and this is probably unpopular to say, but it really kind of irrelevant at this point. This is not something disrespectful in any way, shape, or form towards Jackie Kennedy, what I'm about to say. In fact, I think it is an entirely expected reaction, and I am not claiming that my interpretation of these actions is accurate. Okay? This is just my impression of what I saw. It appeared more to me like someone attempting to escape
In others, you're saying you did see her climb out, or what seemed to be climbing out of or at least reaching out over the back of the trunk.
Yeah, but it didn't seem like somebody reaching for something.
I see.
Not at all. It seemed to me somebody panicked. And who wouldn't be?
But you didn't see Clint Hill come and push her back in or anything like that you recall? You recall?
I don't recall that. I don't recall that.
But let me ask you this, too.
And I'm not saying it didn't happen. It doesn't stand out at all.
You mentioned the phrase conspiracy theorist, which has been used as a club, and of course it is an attempt to trivialize. I've sometimes used the phrase conspiracy realist, but a more neutral and appropriate term is simply conspiracy researcher, because what we're doing is, doing research into the occurrence of deaths that were politically significant, where there's every reason to believe that a conspiracy might have been involved in order to determine whether one was or wasn't, if so, who was involved and why.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think you hit it on the head. The attempt to trivialize it, or even to depict it as something that's often to the fringe and Looney Tune world land. And I don't know the exact statistic, but I would venture to say that well over 75% of the crimes committed in the United States, let's say I'm wrong by 3 times over, let's say 1 out of 4, are conspiracy based. I mean, even if two people do it, even 2 people only doing it. See, so this is a regular occurrence in the United States.
Yep. Conspiracy
happens in the United States every single day.
Yeah,
and that's only going by the ones that we know that got caught.
That's right. In composing my first serious article about 9/11, it was entitled "Thinking About Conspiracy Theories: 9/11 and JFK." I pointed out that since conspiracies only involve 2 or more persons collaborating to bring about an illegal end, they're actually as American as apple pie. And toward the end of that article, Monk, I went through an issue of the New York Times, and I found stories about conspiracies on virtually every single page. I mean, what would Shakespeare have had to write about if it weren't for plots against the kings and queens of England, for crying out loud?
Right.
I mean?
Yep.
It's absurd. Is somebody going to maintain that Julius Caesar was not assassinated by conspiracy?
That's right.
30 senators did.
Interesting, and even though this was probably a little bit of artistic license on Oliver Stone's part, even in the movie JFK, the Fletcher Prouty character, Man X, even makes a comment to Kevin Costner's character, Jim Garrison. He says something to the effect of, it's a story, kings are killed, Mr. Garrison, right?
Yes.
It's a story that's as old as the crucifixion.
Yes. Yes.
That Man X says. And again, just alluding to the fact that, and again, I'm not a religious person. I'm not talking about Jesus per se, but as a political figure, because he was a political figure, for those who believe he existed, he's a political figure. Well, is there any question that was a conspiracy?
Yes.
Right? So even one of the great religions of the world, right? Well, the object of their adoration. Right. He was the victim of a conspiracy. So how can you possibly think that it's that rare a thing? It's not.
Yes.
It's been around forever. People need help to do stuff. People need help. And don't you love the way the reverse argument is thrown out there by people like Bugliosi and those of his ilk? People just don't want to believe that such a young, vibrant, charismatic leader as John F. Kennedy could be taken out by a low-life, sniveling, no-count person like Oswald.
Yes.
What are you talking about?
I know, and begging all the questions, of course, presuming Oswald's guilt and that it was not a conspiracy when all the evidence is the opposite. It's a really shabby rhetorical technique that he was employing there.
Oh gosh, yeah, and it's just so transparent. It's amazing.
Monk, I'm so pleased to you for coming on the show today, and especially when it's coupled with the first hour with Jesse Ventura. And I got to say, of all the prominent figures in the public, he seems to me to be doing more to bring truth about complex and controversial issues like FEMA camps and 9/11 and the assassination of JFK than anyone else out there. So I really admire the man, and I'm so pleased that I was able to feature you on the same program with him.
Oh, thanks, Jim. I really appreciate it. I really like Jesse Ventura's work an awful lot, and he's taken a lot of chances and getting a lot of attention, which I think is real important. It's difficult, as you know, to get attention to this, other than the controlled attention that the media occasionally gives it for whatever whatever reasons. But all of these things, these issues that have been raised, so many of them that you've raised in the books that you've edited, there's so many facts of evidence that have not been adequately answered, nor have they even been addressed by what I'm going to call the other side. They just, if it's inconvenient, it's ignored. And that's just quite interesting, quite interesting. There are things that would have made the New York Times just like that. Just like that, in November, December of '63. If it would have come out then, front page. And today, some of the stuff, it's, Freedom of Information Act, you can get a whole lot of information out there, a lot of documents out there. It doesn't even get a back corner.
Monk, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, thanking my special guest Greg Burnham, for coming here today, to Jesse Ventura as well, and to all of you for listening.